From the classics like Mario and Jak and Daxter, to modern indie titles like A Hat in Time, these games all managed to tap into something to make them into the beloved titles that they are today. What principles and tricks did the developers use, and what can we learn from these titles for our own projects? The most obvious place to start is with your character and their movement. This is fundamental to a platformer. If your character isn't fun to control, then you've already failed before you create a single level or place a single collectible. Famously, the first few months of development on Mario 64 were focused exclusively on Mario's movement. For a platformer to be fun, your character must be fun to control, even when in a completely empty, flat map. But what is it exactly that makes a character fun to control? There isn't one right answer here. Some characters place a heavy emphasis on weight and momentum, whereas others are twitchier and more precise. What unites all of these characters, however, is the level of freedom and expression that their movesets lend to the player. From Mario's backflip and Jack's somersault to Hat Kid's dive, all of these characters possess a variety of different moves that the player has at their disposal, allowing them to select the best move for the situation in front of them. What's more, these moves can be chained together in a variety of combinations, giving advanced players the ability to turn a level into a jungle gym, jumping and diving their way through a level with finesse and elegance. Each individual move also gives the player a high degree of control over the motion, with a huge variety of ways the move can play out, depending on the exact input given by the player, meaning that the player always has the right tool for any given situation. To give a simple example, the height and trajectory of Mario's jump is dependent on how fast he's running, the length of time you hold the A button, and of course, the direction that you are holding on the analog stick. If Mario jumped in the exact same way every time you pressed A, then it would be a nightmare to navigate through these levels. Now, let's talk about how level design enables and enhances the freedom given to you by the controls. Your character may have an expressive moveset, but in a poorly designed level, there is never any reason to bother to make use of these moves. A well-designed level, on the other hand, will give players many different options to conquer the obstacles in front of them in a way that they see fit. Furthermore, the best levels will reward advanced players who have conquered their moveset by allowing them to traverse the level faster and more gracefully than you could with just the basic controls. Often, there will also be optional areas more challenging than the main game to further test these players. Finally, these games often build up to these endgame gauntlets which test the player's overall mastery of the controls. Importantly, 3D level design isn't about making precise jumps or sequences of moves. Unlike a 2D platformer, where the fixed side-scrolling camera perspective means that you can always predict where your character will land, in a 3D game, the camera is always moving and so the perspective is always changing, meaning that it can feel overly punishing when you're expected to make precise jumps. There are several tricks that can be used to help with this though. Firstly, notice that, unlike most games, in a 3D platformer, your character's shadow is always directly underneath the character, regardless of the position of any light sources. This means that you always have a frame of reference to tell where your character will land. These games often give you additional moves as well to help align your jump, such as the double jump, glide, or the ability to grab ledges if you don't quite make a jump, to make platforming in a 3D space more forgiving. Another important aspect of level design is navigation. A well-designed level is easy for the players to understand and navigate. They can understand how the space is laid out, where they've already been, and how to get to an area that they want to get to. In any given level in a good 3D platformer, there will be distinct landmarks in different areas, so the player can differentiate them and use them to navigate back to areas that they've been before. Good platformers also often make use of classical composition techniques using elements like light, frames, or leading lines to draw the eye down a particular path, helping the player understand how to navigate through the space. Collectibles are also used resourcefully and with purpose, often being strung along the critical path to help guide a player forward. Finally, these games will often make use of so-called weenies, large distinct structures in the middle of the level. These help the player understand where they are in relation to the level and help them navigate back to a familiar area should they get lost. Now let's talk about game feel. For those unaware, game feel is a rather nebulous term that refers to the tactile sensation that the game gives back through audio-visual feedback to make the game feel more fun and satisfying to play. As an example, let's return to the player character again and focus on your basic jump. Notice that, in order to make your character feel responsive, the character will begin to move upwards on the first frame when you press the jump button. This means that there's no wind-up where we see your character prepare and build energy for the jump. This means that we have to sell the force of the jump in other ways. The most obvious way is sound effects. There will either be a sound of a thud as your character's feet leap off the floor, or you will hear the exertion in your character's voice as they vocalize their jump. Some games make use of a particle effect of dirt or dust being disturbed as you jump, which helps sell the idea that your character has physically pushed themselves off the ground. Then there is a second particle effect as you land, selling the impact of your character on the ground. Finally, some games borrow from the animation principle of squash and stretch, physically stretching your character out as they move upwards to sell the force and motion behind the jump. A jump that is lacking in these elements will feel floaty, as there is an inherent faintness to the jump without any force behind it. Another great example of game feel is in collectibles, a near ubiquitous element in 3D platformers. What makes collectibles fun to collect? The rewards that they give to the player in these games are usually very minor, be it a one-up or simple access to new areas. Well, that's because the real reward for collectibles is the experience of collecting them itself. As you're playing through the game, you begin to learn what the sensation of collecting these items feel like, and so, when you next see them, you anticipate the experience coming again and crave it. Once you collect them, that anticipated experience arrives, further reinforcing your desire to collect these items in the future. But what is it that makes these items so rewarding to collect? This is where game feel comes in. Firstly, let's take a look at more minor collectibles like coins or orbs. Take a listen to how it sounds to pick up these objects. Notice how satisfying these noises are in themselves. Furthermore, for more major collectibles, you're usually rewarded with a jingle, here we go! A fun animation, and in some cases dialogue or story content. Additionally, the presence of hidden collectibles also increases the reward, as not knowing how or when you'll get that next collectible increases your level of anticipation. This is precisely what makes collectibles fun. If all collecting an item did made a counter go up, you wouldn't want these items nearly as much as you do. And that's everything I have for you. Not every game uses all of these techniques, and conversely, there are others I haven't mentioned here that suit certain styles of game particularly well. However, in my view, these are the core techniques that any developer working on a 3D platformer should be aware of, so they can make informed choices about the best design for their game. I grew up playing 3D platformers like Spyro and Jak and Daxter, and in my view, this is a criminally underutilized genre today. So if you're working on a 3D platformer and found this video helpful, please join my Discord server and drop a link because I'd love to see it. Also, make sure to subscribe if you're interested in seeing more videos like this one. Finally, if you have any other genres or types of games you'd like to see me cover, make sure to leave a comment. I'd love to hear what kinds of games you're all interested in. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.